At 8:48 a.m. on Tuesday morning, I was reading my email like I do every morning. I had just gotten off the phone with a traffic engineer at the Port Authority regarding a file that I had transmitted to him on the previous day. As I was finishing off my usual peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I heard a loud explosion, which was immediately followed by tremendous building sways and vibrations. As I was thrown out of my chair, I immediately thought that this was an earthquake, but still thinking rationally, I thought that this was abnormal since there were no earthquakes in New York City, especially of this magnitude. I remember thinking that the building felt like it was going to collapse from this initial explosion. As I picked myself up and ran to the emergency staircase located in the core of this huge building, I saw through the east-facing windows debris and fireballs falling from the top of the building. The building had stabilized by the time I reached the stairwell, and evacuation had commenced, quickly but calmly. Not knowing the gravity of what was happening above us, people had started pouring into the stairwell from hallways of the different floors. I saw a coworker from my floor, the 72nd, and we held and consoled each other. There were no public announcements in the stairwell, but the evacuation seemed to be going smoothly. There were no more explosions as far as we could tell, no smoke coming up the stairs, and the building had stopped swaying. We all felt like we were out of imminent danger. As we started to make it down the stairwell, people started chatting and gathering their composures. I heard some people who had been there in '93 telling others that this was a piece of cake since the stairwell was dark and full of smoke back in '93. Others were joking about how Mr. Silverstein, who had just recently taken control of the complex, must be fuming at what was happening. A few minutes passed, and people began to receive messages over their pagers that a 767 had accidentally hit our building. There was no mention of a terrorist attack, and at no time was there any panic. Mobile phones were completely out in the core of the building due to its immenseness and the large distance from the core of the building to the exterior, where the signals were usually stronger. There was no smoke at all in the stairwell, but there was this strange smell, which I later found out was jet fuel. Soon we all heard shouts from the people above us to keep to the right. I started seeing blind people, those with difficulty moving, asthmatics, and injured people filing down to our left. People were burned so badly that I won't go into describing it. People kept filing down orderly and calmly, but stunned. Sometime around the 30th or 40th floor, we passed the firefighters coming up the stairs. They reassured people that we were safe and that we would all get out fine. By this point, they were already absolutely breathless, but still pushing upward, slowly and unyieldingly, one step at a time. I could only imagine how tired they were, carrying their axes, hoses, and heavy outfits, and climbing up all those stairs. Young men started offering to carry up the firemen's gear for a few flights of stairs, but they all refused, each and every one of them. As I relive this moment over and over in my mind, I can't help but think that these courageous firemen already knew in their minds that they were not going to make it out of the building alive, and that they did not want to endanger any more civilians and prevent one less person from making it safely on the ground. We continued down the stairwell slowly, and at times completely stalled. The smell of jet fuel had gotten so unbearable that people began covering their mouths and noses with anything that they could find: ties, shirts, handkerchiefs, etc. Every few floors, emergency crews were passing out water and sodas from the vending machines that they had split open from the hallways. I had no idea how much time had passed by as I didn't have my mobile phone with me. Around the 20th or 15th floor, the emergency crew began diverting the people into the stairwell to a different stairwell. They led us out of the stairwell, across the hallway, where I saw exhausted firemen and emergency crew sitting on the floor trying to catch their breaths. I was thinking, why? What's going on? This whole operation looked very confusing. Nobody was giving us any indication as to what was going on. The wait in the hallway to get to the other staircase was excruciatingly long, as we had to wait to merge with the people who were coming down the staircase into which we were filing. Why had they diverted us? As we started to move down to the lower floors, water started to pour down from behind us. I figured that a water pipe had burst, or that it was water coming down from the rescue on the higher floors. For the first time since the initial explosion, a sense of panic began to grip me. Only 7 more floors, then 6. A few more to go, and I would be free. I couldn't wait. It didn't matter that the water was ankle deep. I was a few floors from the ground, floor 4. Then all of a sudden, a loud boom, and the building began to shake unbearably again. People started falling down the stairwell as smoke started to rise from the bottom. The emergency lights flickered and then went out. The building was still shaking, and I could hear the steel buckling. Rescuers below us shouted for us to go back up the stairs. At this moment, I was choking and shaking tremendously. I managed to climb back up to the 6th or 7th floor and open the door to that floor. The water had risen to my ankles, and the floor was completely dark. A fireman led us with his flashlights to another staircase by the voice of another fireman who was guiding him through the darkness. We finally made it across that floor to another stairwell where we were greeted by another fireman who told us to hold. The look on that fireman's face said it all. He said something under his breath to our fireman, indicating the severity of the situation. With the image of the firemen communicating to each other, and hindsight, I believe that the fireman whispered to our fireman that building 2 had collapsed. After a few minutes of huddling by the stairwell on the 6th floor, we were given the green light to run for our lives. I made it down 6 flights with a few other people and came out on the mezzanine level of our building. I don't know what I was expecting to see when I got out of the stairwell, but I was not ready for this apocalyptic scene. It was completely filled with white dust and smoke. You could barely even see. My initial reaction was that I couldn't believe that one plane, albeit a 767, 80 floors above our head, caused all this damage on the ground floor, inside. I covered my head and ran towards the huge opening in the north side of the building through which we were being evacuated. As I approached this threshold, the firemen yelled to us to get over to the wall of the building quickly. Debris was raining from all sides of the building. We could see the firefighters who were outside, standing underneath the cantilevered parts of the black immigration building, 4 and/or 5 World Trade Center. At their cue, we ran from our building to the outside world and back underneath the immigration building. I was completely disoriented, coughing, and looking at the strange new landscape at the World Trade Center plaza. Burning trees, wreckage, fireballs and dust. Nothing short of a nuclear winter. I climbed over huge pieces of steel wreckage and made my way through the sky bridge leading to Building 7, the 3rd building to collapse. From there, I descended the escalators down to the street level onto Vesey Street and trotted to safety on Church Street. I immediately looked back and saw the charred remains of the upper floors of my building. Smoke filled the sky, and I began to have this eerie feeling that building number 2 was not there. I couldn't be sure because of all the smoke that was billowing from my building blowing eastward. As I was trying to find number 2, I saw the unthinkable happen right in front of my eyes. Tower number 1 began to disintegrate from where it was burning. I turned around and ran. I later learned that another 767 had hit tower number 2, around the floors where I sit in my building. I also learned later that tower number 2 had collapsed when we were still inside my building, on the 4th floor, when it began to shake for the second time, and that I had been spared from the sight of seeing people falling from the higher floors. I am grateful to be alive and uninjured and able to share this life-changing experience with you. I am so grateful for the courage of the firemen and policemen who gave up their lives to help us down from the burning tower. I arrived for work that morning on the 77th floor of World Trade Center Tower 2 at around 8 a.m. It was a bright, beautiful morning, and you could see seemingly forever out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the building. My company had offices on the 77th and 78th floors. My office was on the 77th, facing tower number 1. I was standing in the hallway outside my office, talking to a coworker, when I heard a tremendous explosion at 8:46 a.m. I looked into my office has floor-to-wall ceiling glass, and saw a gaping hole in the south side of World Trade Center number 1. We had no idea what happened. No part of the plane was visible. It hit tower number 1 from the north, the opposite side my offices faced. Eventually word filtered in from somewhere that it was a plane that hit the building. We didn't know whether it was a commercial jet or a private plane like the Gulfstream. It also didn't occur to me at the time that it was a terrorist attack. I just assumed it was a terrible accident. I started to see people appear at the edge of the gaping hole. Smoke was pouring out, and while I don't recall seeing much in the way of flames, it was clear that there was a raging fire going on inside the building. I saw a number of people jump to their death, desperate to get away from the heat and flames. It's hard to express what I felt at that point. I can only describe it as shock. Your mind cannot really comprehend what is happening, almost an overload state. You see it with your eyes, but you are somehow mentally detached from it at the same time. I called my wife to let her know what was happening. She was just walking out of Penn Station on her way to work. I quickly apprised her of the situation and told her that within a few minutes there would probably be pandemonium as people learned what had happened. I assured her that I was okay and my building was not impacted, and told her that I would call her again when I could. Many of my coworkers began to leave the building immediately after the plane hit. For various reasons, I decided to stay. This was partially because I believed that it was an accident and I was in no immediate danger. I was head of technology for a financial information firm at the time. Based on what I was seeing, I figured it might be days or weeks before we could return to our offices, so there were many things I needed to attend to so that operations could be moved to an off-site location. I left my office and took the escalator in our space up to the 78th floor. We had a large conference room there with a projector and cable TV, so I wanted to get the news on to see what was happening. I turned on CNN. Information looked pretty sketchy, but I decided to return to the 77th floor to inform my remaining coworkers that I had TV coverage on upstairs if they wanted to come up. I returned to my office and decided to call my mother. A few seconds after hanging up the phone, at 9:03 a.m., I felt a violent jolt, and then a falling sensation. I remember thinking that the building was coming down, and it was the end. The impact caused the building to sway heavily. It was actually designed to sway to a certain degree, as the towers have to withstand high winds on a regular basis, but this was far beyond anything I'd ever felt before. Eventually, the building stabilized. Much of the ceiling had come down, and I could feel the breeze from the blown-out windows on the other side of the floor. This felt oddly disconcerting, since none of the windows were designed to open in the World Trade Center. I honestly didn't know what happened. Strangely enough, my first thought was that Tower Number 1 somehow exploded, and what we were experiencing was the impact of that. I found myself outside my office with a number of coworkers. There was tons of dust and debris in the air, and the electricity was out. While I was covered in dust and other particles, I was not injured. We, about 10 of us, made our way to the stairwell on the northeast side of the building. Upon arriving at the stairwell, we ran into some people who had apparently just come down from the 78th floor. One woman had a severe laceration on her arm. While the wound was quite serious, it did not appear to be life-threatening. There was some brief discussion about going up, and I cannot recall why, but the injured woman, or someone she was with, mentioned that everyone was dead on the 78th floor. I later found out that United Airlines Flight 175 had smashed into the southwest face of the tower, creating an impact hole that extended from the 78th to 84th floors. Apparently, the conference room that I had just been standing in a few minutes ago was now obliterated. Had I decided to stay on the 78th floor, instead of returning to my office when I did, I would not be alive today. Tragically, 2 co-workers, who I considered personal friends, took an opposite path that day, making their way from the 77th floor to their offices on the 78th floor just before the impact. I never saw them again. Seemingly insignificant decisions a person made that day determined whether they lived or died. It's still something that's a bit hard to fully come to terms with. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my wife had arrived at work at the Midtown financial firm where she worked, right around the time my building was hit. The World Trade Center towers were clearly visible from the trading floor of her firm. While we'd spoken earlier and she knew I was okay, that was before the second plane hit World Trade Center Tower 2. She knew I was still in the building at the time, and she knew what floor I worked on. So at that point, she had no idea whether I was still alive. Once we got into the 77th floor stairwell, I recalled jet fuel pouring down the stairs. I mentioned previously, I was definitely in some form of shock. At the time, I was not thinking rationally. Having worked as a baggage handler at JFK Airport for a summer, ironically for United Airlines of all companies, I knew what jet fuel smelled like. Still, I could not put one and one together and make the connection that a jetliner had just crashed into the building only a few feet above my head and split open, spilling the contents of its fuel tank inside the building core. We slowly made our way down the 77 flights of stairs. A woman there who worked with me at the time was about 6 months pregnant, so we went slowly in order to stay with her and help her down. I remember passing a number of firefighters heading up the stairs. They had a full set of gear on, and they looked weary and frightened, yet they continued up past us. It's hard to put into words what I feel for the firefighters who sacrificed everything that day in order to help others. Reverence is about as close as I can get. Eventually, we exited the stairwell and made our way into the mall connecting the World Trade Center complex. I recall thinking that we were still alive and basically were out of danger. It was then that I saw a police officer or firefighter yelling and waving at us frantically, telling us to get out of the building. We exited the mall in the northeast corner near the Millennium Hotel. We were standing on the street, and it was chaos. I was with a colleague and my boss at the time. There was debris falling off the building, and my boss suggested that we get out of the area. We began walking north. We had gotten maybe 5 blocks away when we heard a large rumble and saw a massive dust cloud to the south of us from the direction we came. Word eventually filtered up through the crowd that World Trade Center Tower 2, where my office resided, had just fallen. It was a strange and surreal experience. Thoughts flooded through my mind, like, how many people just lost their lives? Do I still have a job? Even a mental inventory of the things that were in my office that no longer existed. Words with my coworkers, which I cannot recall, were exchanged, and I decided to set off on my own to try and get home and reach my family to let them know I was okay. I lost 4 friends that day, who will forever remain in my heart. I try to live every day to the fullest, to honor their lives, and the lives of the others who perished that day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you can catch all of my future content. I hope you all have a great weekend, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.